Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Okay, so it's going to be important that we are working with metric, okay? So let me remind you what that is again. I'm given a graph, and every pair of nodes has an edge between them, and it has length dij, and dij obeys triangle inequality. So dij is less than or equal to dik plus dkj. Okay, that's what a metric is. So you're given me a metric, okay, and then it's the usual thing, okay? Every vertex has a cost of opening a facility, okay? And my goal is to find a subset of facilities to open, right? And every node then goes to its closest facility, right? So everybody goes to their closest facility J, which is open, okay? And the cost I'm minimizing is sum of the opening cost of the facilities that I open, right? Plus the distances from I to the set F. Okay, this is min over J in F, right? That's the distance from I to F. Okay, so this is what I'm minimizing, assuming that this is a metric. Okay, so this is metric UFL, uncapacitated facility location. Okay, so who wants to write the LP? Integer relaxation. You want to try? Yeah, go ahead, yeah. Help me out, yeah. What are the variables?
Some
XU for
facility
at U, okay. Good, okay, good. That's the decision variable, okay, for opening a facility. Okay, yeah, that's clear, yeah. XUV for if facility vertex V is assigned to be served by facility at U. Okay?
or I can say
XF. Okay. Can we also change the X to something else? Call it Y or something. So we can just call, yeah. Okay. So X variables are opening variables and Y variables are assignment variables. Okay.
I want to
Minimize, yeah.
set of all
Good. Set of all facilities,
cost of that
facility times X of the facility. Okay. Yeah. Vertices, right? Right? V, let's say, yeah.
cost of assigning that
Facility, that vertex, V,
yeah, cost of this cost
Distance.
we have to pay distance
the distance, right? So dV, V to F, okay. What is F?
or I would say F2
Okay.
this this is
the length of the edge, right?
and y
Good. Y FV is multiplying it. So you also have to sum over F, is it? You only have a sum over V, maybe. Yeah. So also sum over F. Okay, good.
but in an optimal solution you don't need to assign it to multiple.
That's right. I mean, in an optimal solution, only one of these hopefully will be set to 1 for a particular V. Okay, so let's write the constraints. Okay, so is this costs are okay? Yeah? All right. Now what are the constraints? Yeah.
No, I'm not getting why F is also considered in the double sum.
Why do we need the double
You
sum?
are varying V and that takes care of everything.
No, for each V, you have to pay something. How much are you paying for that V?
That is the distance.
But for which F? See, for each V, you could go to one of many different Fs. So what she has to do is also sum over all the Fs for that V. So let's actually make it more clear, right? So let's make it a double sum. So she's actually written it for a more general case where only some subset F are allowed to be facilities and V is the part that's supposed to be covered. Okay, so that's how she's writing it. V here, F here. So she has to sum over all these Fs that I can potentially assign V to. Okay, all right, continue. Yeah.
So I have to satisfy the constraint that every vertex is assigned to some.
That's right. You have to assign every vertex to some facility. Yeah.
So that will mean that for every vertex in V,
Good.
if I sum over all F which is in neighborhood of that vertex,
There's no neighborhood. This is everybody, right? Yeah. I mean, it's a metric, right? So everybody is your neighbor. It's a complete graph. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah.
if you sum up, at least one of them should be
Open. Right. How do you write that?
So XF is at least one.
Okay. So you're saying one of.
Yeah, that I can simplify it at the end.
Okay,
At least
all right.
one of them should be open.
That's clear. All you've written so far is you have to open one facility. Okay.
Oh, okay.
That's all you've written so
Because
far.
not everything is.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I can as well write it as, say, y FP is. This should be assigned to at least one.
One facility. Okay, good. You have to assign the vertex V to some facility. That makes sense. Okay.
And then you also need to say that the facility to which it is assigned
Right.
is chosen.
Is open. If you assign Y a facility, if you assign V to a facility, that facility must be open. Okay, write it down.
So I can say it is XF is what I want to convey is like if XF is Y FP is
1. If that is 1,
it is 1.
Then
Implies
that implies
XF
XF.
is also 1.
Excellent.
So since we are aiming for an integer program,
Right.
I can write it as Y XF3
YFV, you mean? Yeah. Hang on. Let her write something down. Right.
YFP
Right? Is greater than or equal to XF, is it? Yeah.
correct? XF Y implies that
Hmm.
XF is 1. So this implies that YF is 1 implies that
Good. Okay. So she's trying to force YF being 1, YFV being 1, to push XF to be 1. So she's saying if YFV is 1, it's less than or equal to xf, that means xf also should be 1. So if you assign vertex v to facility f must be open. Okay, good. So this is for all what? For all f, for all v. For all v. Good.
And then
Non-negativity, right? Anything else we need?
That constraint summation of y, shouldn't that be the equality constraint, because exactly one prime will be connected to the factory.
so that, and what I'm saying is in the optimal solution, so you don't have to assign both YFPs. If suppose you have two facilities to which one vertex is assigned. So if this say Y V1, this one I am setting to non-zero, then there is no reason that I have to set this to non-zero because the cost is only going to increase.
Yeah. I mean, you're minimizing, right? So what he's saying is right. You can, without loss of generality, in this case, make it equal to 1. Because if you assigned v to more than 1, you can just wipe out the last part that you assign and save some money in the objective function. So in this case, it's okay to put equal to 1. It will still be okay. But she's saying, you know, it's a minimization problem, so just make it greater than or equal to 1. Okay, but yeah, you can equal to 1 will work here. Okay, so this is actually a very famous formulation by Balinsky. The 70s, maybe 60s, yeah. He wrote this, you know, facility location formulation down. Okay, so now I want to do some filter and round. Okay, so we just had filter coffee, so we should try it. Okay, so what do? We just solve the LP. Solve the LP, you will get a x star, y star. Okay, and now I just have to round it up to 1s and 0s, or round it down to 0s. Is that clear? Okay, so simple rounding is actually quite simple, so let's just do it. So what I'm going to describe for you comes from, I've been very bad with references so far, I realize. So I said Balinsky already. What I'm going to describe for you comes from an old paper of Jihan Lin and Jeff Witter, okay, where they introduced a method called filtering. Filtering you should think of as Markov inequality. Okay, it's basically filtering. Okay, and then this technique was used by Ardal, Shimois, and Tardish to give the first constant approximation for this problem. Okay, and then this trick has been used innumerable times since then. Okay, so I'm just going to show you the basic trick and then you will pick it up. Okay, so it's not, but the first trick idea for filtering came from Lin and Witter. Okay, excuse me. Okay, so we got ourselves an x star and a y star. Okay, and what I want to tell you is, if you just think for a while about how on earth am I going to use all these y stars. So think of what an LP solution will look like, okay? It'll pick a V, it'll assign it fractionally to a whole bunch of facilities. Okay? So it might assign it to, 0.1 to this guy, 0.05 to this guy, and so on. So that this whole thing sums to 1. Okay? So you might, in the worst case, have a solution to this LP where each vertex is assigned to every facility. And if I assign, for example, this guy to the extent 0.1 to this facility, and this guy assigns it to the extent 0.2, I will open this facility how much? I have to use this constraint. I have to open the facility as much as the largest guy who assigns himself to me wants me to be open. So I'll just take the max over all the guys who have assigned themselves to me, and I'll take the max and I'll set this y value to be that much. Okay? So I can have an extremely messy fractional solution for facility location. Right? So here comes the idea of Lin and Witter. They said, this is just too much. Let's just figure out why are we using these facilities in this LP solution? Okay, well, you look at the objective function. You really want to assign yourself to one guy. Okay, so now let's sort of flip our orientation. Here I am, node V. Here are all the facilities. Okay, let me now sort all these facilities in increasing order of their distance from me. This is a trick we already encountered in the greedy algorithm for facility location, right? You remember this, right? So I'll just say, okay, you're the closest guy, here's the next closest guy. Now let me examine the LP solution and see how much each of these facilities have been fractionally opened. Let's say, you know, this guy was opened 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.05, 0.6, and so on. Okay? How will I set my assignment variables? Well, this guy is the closest guy to me. So I'm going to try to assign myself to him as much as possible. That means I'll go until 0.1. So I'll assign x, it's called y here, okay. yv to this guy, I'll assign it 0.1. yv to this guy will be 0.2. yv to this guy will be 0.3. I'll keep going until I fill up 1. So 0.1, 0.3, 0.6, 0.65. So I'll take 0.35 from this guy and I'll stop. Because then I would have satisfied yfv at least 1 for this v. Is that clear? Okay. So this is the first thing you should observe. For any LP solution, this is true. So in fact, what I'm telling you is the following. To solve this LP, I don't even have to write down the y's. If you tell me what the opening variables are, I can tell you what the best y values will be. Because you will just do this. You will just look at how much the closest facilities are open and you will just sort, right? And you will just fill up until you get to 1. So you don't have to worry about this YFV at all. Okay? Now once you got that, you ask yourself, how much am I paying for V in the objective function? Okay? I'm paying 0.1 times this distance plus 0.2 times this distance, dot, 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 until 0.35 times this last distance, until I get to 1. Okay? Let's call that value dV. Okay, so dV is the sum over all the facilities of the distance to that guy times whether you're assigned to that guy in my optimal solution. Okay, so if you like, I'll put a star here. Okay, it comes from the optimal solution y star. Okay, so d star V is the amount that V pays in an optimal solution to connect to the closest fractional facility. That's what d star V is. Okay, this term is d star V. So now the idea of Lin and Witter is, okay, the following. They said, suppose you have this extremely fractional solution. Okay, so here is V, here is all these guys. Okay, and we know that LP is only paying d star V in the optimal solution. They said, why don't we restrict ourselves to assigning V only to all the facilities who are within distance 2 times d star V away. Okay? So in other words, in the metric, draw a ball of radius 2 times d star V. Okay? Whoever is inside that is a closed facility for V, according to the LP. Whoever is beyond that, I want to zero out all these terms. That's what they said. Why? Because this is kind of nice, right? I'm starting to convert the LP into a solution where every vertex not only is fractionally good, but even in terms of the y values, it only goes to the guys who are close enough. I don't want to worry about these really far away guys. You know, maybe have 0.001 times this distance. It's too far away. But here is a beautiful thing. Here is where Markov inequality shows up. Okay? If I'm restricting myself only to all the facilities within distance 2 times d star V, what can I say about the x value assigned to these facilities. Not X value, Y value, YVF1, YVF2. Okay? They have to be at least half, exactly. Sum over F such that distance from V to F is up to 2d star of V of the X value, not X value, I'm sorry, Y value, Y star value is at least half. This is just an averaging argument, okay? Let's see the proof, okay? Suppose this amount of assignment up till here is less than half. That means the amount you're assigning beyond here is more than half, okay? But everybody beyond here is at distance more than 2d. Each of them you have assigned an y value, and those y values sum to greater than half. So greater than 2t times greater than half is strictly greater than d. But d is the value of this sum. It's just Markov inequality, right? Probability distribution, you know, what's the chance that you hit somebody whose value is at most 2 times the expectation? Probability at least half. Same thing, yeah? Great. So here is what they said. Let's restrict ourselves. We start with the solution x star, y star. We are converting it into a solution x prime where all the assignments have to go to people within distance 2d. So we want a closed solution. Okay, so I convert x star, y star by filtering into a closed solution x prime, y prime. What is the closed solution? I'll define it for you now. Okay? X prime of F, a facility, I have to open it, is going to be something. Y prime of FV is going to be 0 if the distance from F to V is greater than 2 times d star of V. This is where I'm closing down my assignment to all these facilities. How much should I give to everybody else? Well, I know that the sum of the assignments to the first few guys is at least half. So if I want to make it to come to at least 1, I have to double everything. So I'll just make it 2 times y star FV. Right? I'm getting at least half, I double it, I'm getting at least 1. This constraint is okay. Right? Now how much should I change x so that this is okay? Double it. 2 times x star. This is also okay. Okay? So look at what I have done. I used to pay x star, y star. Now I'm paying at most 2x star, y star. So what has happened to the LP value? 2 times. Just like our vertex cover. Except that I'm not finished yet. I've only gotten everybody to come within distance 2 times d star of V. Okay, but this is a major step because now we are almost there. Why? Because in this filtered solution, right, everybody within a distance of 2 times opt, 2 times d star of V, has a weight assignment of 1. That means the total facility amount which is opened within this neighborhood fractionally is 1, right? After I filtered, right, the amount of fractional facilities that are available within a short distance of me, 2 times d star of V is at least 1. Okay? So that means everybody's, if you look at it from every client's point of view, within a really short distance of them, there is a whole fractional facility available. So we are very close to finishing it off. Okay? So here's how we'll finish it off. Okay, we've got a filtered solution. Let's now look at the viewpoint of each of these clients. Okay, so each client, client V1, this is the distance to d star 1. Sorry? You can make it any alpha. You can make it 3, you will get 1/3. 2/3, sorry, yeah. So it's just a constant. Okay, I'm not worrying. It's just an idea, right? Close means constant times of optimal, right? So you could also try some other parameter like log n of optimal and see if it. Finally, you have to figure out what it gives you in terms of approximation factor, right? So it's all that is post processing, right? This is the way to get there, right? Okay, so here is one guy. Within this guy, there is a right, and here's another guy. Here's another guy. Here's another guy. These are all the 2 D star balls around every node. And they can be different, right? Depending on how much they are all paying in the objective function. Okay? So to finish this off, this is what you do. You realize that within each of these balls, there is one amount of facility. Right? Now, if I take this ball and this ball, okay, and I try to open a facility within each one of them. Because, fractionally I've got one facility. So I thought, why don't I pay for one full facility, namely the cheapest facility. Cheapest facility is cheaper than the fractional full facility. So suppose I do that, there is a problem because both these balls may share some nodes, right, which for each of them is helping to open the facility. So the next idea Ardel, Chemois and Tardash realized was, I should not be opening facilities in all of these balls. I should be opening them only in a disjoint set of these balls. Maybe this one, and that's it. Okay, now why is this a good idea? If I only commit myself to opening one facility in each of these disjoint sets of balls, the amount of money I'm paying to open the facility is at most the amount of money I'm spending on x prime. Right? Because x prime value within here is 1. That value is completely disjoint from the x prime here, which is 1. Right? If I pick the cheapest facility in each of these balls, I'm just charging it to x prime. Okay? So that's the next realization. I have to figure out which set of disjoint balls I have to open. And now comes the very last part. If I am one of the unfortunate balls that is not used for opening a facility, how will I get connected to open facility? Well, the reason I was not picked was because I was overlapping with an open facility opening ball, right? So I'll need to get to that ball, then I'll have to go to the center of that ball, and then I'll have to go to whichever facility was opened in that ball. Okay, so I have to make 3 hops. One here to this corner, here to there, and here to there. And I have to charge these 3 hops to the amount that I have to pay in the objective function. How much did I pay in the objective function? D1 star. Okay, so if I can somehow relate this hop and this hop to D1 star, I can pay for it. So that tells us what the rule should be for picking these disjoint balls. What should it be? I want this to be smaller than that. In other words, I sort all the balls in increasing order of D star. I take the smallest radius ball first, include it, and knock out all the guys who are my neighbors. Then I take the next smallest radius ball, include it, knock out all the neighbors. Now, because I knocked out a neighbor, this guy was knocked out because there was somebody whose radius was less than or equal to my radius. So now instead of going 1 hop of length 2d, I'm going 3 hops of length 2d at most, which is 6 times d. That's the whole algorithm. I'm finished. Huh? To reach that facility, I'm going distance at most 6d. I'm paying d in the LP. Now I'm paying 6d. I'm paying x in the LP. Now I'm paying 2x. So I have a 6 approximation algorithm. Maximum of 2n. In fact, I have a slightly better approximation for the x part, for the opening part. I'm only paying 2 times that. Whereas for the assignment part, I'm paying 6 times that because of this 3 hop path. because I'm sorting. So this is my algorithm. Take all the balls around all the clients, sort them in increasing order of D star. So take the first ball. Let's say this is the smallest D star ball. Pick it. Everybody who overlaps with it, delete it. Take the next smallest radius ball available. Maybe it's this guy. Pick it. Delete all its neighbors. Proceed in this way. So what I'm finding is a maximal independent set. This ball could have been picked at an earlier stage? Yes. Exactly. Yes, that's what I'm doing now. So what I'm doing is, when I pick a ball in my collection, I open a facility in it, the cheapest facility. Now I have to assign this client. Where does he go? He goes to that facility. But everybody else who's overlapping with him, I'm deleting it, right? So when I delete this guy, I have to assign this guy to a facility. Who do I assign it to? I go to the ball who deleted me and I take his facility. That is the 2 plus 2 plus 2. That's where I get the assignment factor 6. Oh, because this radius is 2D, but my distance to the closest facility might be at the edge of this ball. You know, it may be at the other end of this ball is where the facility is. Let's actually focus on this. How do I pick the facility to open in this ball? I just pick, I know that I have x prime value summing to 1, right? So I just pick the facility with positive x prime value, which has the lowest cost. Totally I'm paying 1 unit. So if I pick the cheapest guy, what I'm paying fractionally is enough. But that lowest cost facility may be at the periphery, maybe at the end of this ball of 2D. Right? Because this guy is a client. I don't know where his facility is. This is 2D. This is 2D. And this is another 2DI. And I know DI is greater than or equal to D. Therefore, it's 2 plus 2 plus 2. Yeah.
Can we have two concentric circles, like, can we have two balls overlapping?
Completely like this? Yeah, why not? But what will happen in this case? Who will be the first ball picked? It will be the innermost one.
What if the outermost one is actually covered? We have covered more. Like, the outermost one here would have covered.
This one would have covered more? Yeah, but then I don't know. So if I give you a problem with that idea. If I have a very large ball which seems to cover a lot, but suppose it's adjacent to a lot of tiny balls, you may think it covers more, but how can I pay for this client to make it all the way to the center of this ball and go all the way to the other end here? So, you know, the whole point of doing this distance-based filtering is lost if I pick a very large radius ball. Okay? That's why I'm picking the smallest one. And I'm just wiping out everybody who overlaps with it. Yeah. Why do I go to the center? Because that's the way I can bound it. Of course, I mean, in reality, the assignment will be of this guy to this facility. But how can I say how large is it? I have to find a path and I have to use triangle inequality. Yeah. This is where I use the metric property. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, if you did 4 by 3 D star, right, then for this thing you would have got 3 times 4 by 3, you would have gotten 4. But then you'll have to multiply x also by 4 by 3 only. The factor here will be, well, if it's 4 by 3, you are right. So if I'm only getting within 4 by 3, the amount I'll get within 4 by 3 is how much? A quarter. A quarter. So that means I'll have to multiply this by 4. Right? Instead of, okay, so be careful here. If I'm only going to distance 4/3 D, by Markov inequality, how much money will I get inside? 1/4, right? Because if it's more than 1/4 and I have greater than 4/3, sorry, that's not right. So if it's more than 4/3D, right, I need to get something which is greater than 3/4. Good. Okay, so the inside should be at least 1/4. Okay, the outside cannot be more than 3/4. Therefore, the inside should be at least 1/4. So if the inside is at least 1/4, then I only have to scale it. I have to scale it now by a factor of 4. So if I scale everything by a factor of 4, I'll have to see then this x prime will become 4 times x. But unfortunately, my new d prime, no, actually I think you're okay, you're fine, because I'm still using a 4/3 ball, okay? I'm still using the old d star times 4/3 ball. So you're right, I could have used better numbers and gotten a factor of 4 instead of a factor of 6. I just picked 2 because it's a whole number, it's easy to do everything, yeah. So going back to your question, right? If I had chosen 4/3 instead of 2, this whole analysis would have given me 4 instead of 6 for the approximation guarantee. Okay, so you have to play with this, right? You continue to play with this, yeah. Okay, so I think that's all I want to say about filtering. Yeah. If you choose the closest facility in each ball, the cost may be prohibitive. So for example, in this facility, in this ball, the closest facility may have x value 0.001 and a very high cost. Yeah, in the ball is what I mean. But its opening value is very fractional, but it's very expensive facility. Whereas at the very edge, there is another facility who has value 0.999 x value, but its cost is very tiny. So if I pick the closest facility, I have no handle on the cost of the facility. Right? So the way I give a bound on the cost of the facility is, I know that there are facilities whose x values, opening values, sum up to 1. Therefore, if I pick the cheapest facility, I can pay for it. But I can't pay for the closest facility. That's exactly what we are doing. For each of the picked balls, which are disjoint, we pick the cheapest facility for which there is an x value which is positive in the ball, so that we can assign the, okay? Do you want me to write these inequalities? There are 2 sets of inequalities I have to write. One for the cost of the facilities that are open, and second for this 3-hop path. But I think it's not really worth it. I mean, either you have it by now, or writing algebra never really helps, I think. But if you want, I'll write it. How many of you want algebra? I'll write it, it's okay. Yeah. Okay, all right, okay, fine. Okay, so we cannot pick the closest facility, we have to pick the cheapest facility. And the only thing we want about the balls we pick, as other than the fact they are an independent set, is that for any ball that overlaps with a picked ball, the radius of the overlapping ball should be greater than or equal to the radius of the picked ball. That's all. And I just gave you one way to do it, which is go in sorted order of radii. That's it.
So why can't we independently explain again?
Why should it's independence? Because if I pick 2 balls which overlap and decide to open facilities in them, then in both of them, the intersection may have a very high x value which is shared. So I'm doubling. So to make it very extreme, if I have many balls which all overlap here, and in fact the x value of that facility is 1, right? Then each of them might charge themselves to it. And that's bad, okay? Yeah, so, I mean, you can be fancy about each one of these things, right? When balls overlap, you can try to say, look, I might only pick each ball with the probability proportional to the sum of the x values in it. That's a randomized algorithm. Right? I won't pick a disjoint set of balls. I'll just flip a coin for each ball and I'll pick a facility in it. Okay, now the coin bias should be proportional to the x value within that ball, the opening facility value within that ball. Now, if I make it a large times the x value within the ball, for example, the x value within each ball is at least 1. So if I make it just the sum of the x values, then I'm picking one facility in each ball. That means I can easily cover everybody. But then I'll have the problem of overusing them. But maybe if I make it a small fraction times the x value, then I can allow for overlap. Because if I only say 1/10 x, 10 balls can overlap. Right? So I can start playing games like this. Okay? This idea is called core detouring. Okay? So this, what is happening here, right? I have a core which I have picked. Okay, and I'm detouring everybody through the core, right? So this idea of core detouring along with randomization, all of that stuff, connected facility location, all of this stuff, it's used. But it's just an extension of this idea, right? Once you get this idea, then you can start playing games with, how do I pick these balls in some other nice way? And sometimes I may just not pick a ball at all within your first neighborhood. Then I might have to go 2 neighborhoods to get you. Then I have to trade off the number of hops with how much I save by reducing the probability of the coin that I'm tossing to pick. Right? So this kind of stuff goes on. Okay. Okay, any other questions, conceptual questions? Just for that last connecting part, for the assignment cost. Yeah. 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 Good. Actually, this is a great question. Okay. So, all the analysis we are doing until now did not care about how big was this term in the LP versus this term in the LP. I was just trying to pick one alpha which will balance how much I am paying for a facility within these disjoint balls with how much I'm paying for the distances by detouring. But now you can play one more game like what you're talking about. So for example, if this term in the LP is only 1/10 of this term, so that means I can pay 5 times the cost of opening facilities with respect to this LP. Right? So now I can start playing a beta parameter, which is the ratio of this LP value to that LP value, and bring that also into the analysis. And I'll have some 2-parameter optimization. You can do that also. But unfortunately, that doesn't particularly give you a better factor. Because I can always cook up an LP solution where the ratio of those two is as bad as it can be. I mean, if the ratio of these two is some beta and you do some optimization, there'll be one beta for which you'll get a really lousy rounding. But I can always find an LP which achieves that beta. And then I'm back to optimizing just the alpha parameter. Okay. So this thing mainly so far either works by changing the alpha parameter for the deterministic problem or going to randomized rounding of these balls. Okay. And then trading off the probability of coverage with the probability of facility opening. Those are the 2 things we just trade off. And then we just figure out what's the best trade-off. Right now, for this problem, the ratio is 1.4, I want to say about 1.48. Okay, so it's not 3 or anything. Right now, it's sitting at 1.48. Okay? And the lower bound for this problem is 1.463. So there is a proof that says you cannot get better than 1.463 approximation. Okay, so this is really close right now. Okay, and people are now working very furiously to get an algorithm for this factor. In fact, they even know what this algorithm is. It is some dual fitting algorithm. They are just not able to prove it is 1.463. The best they have proved is 1.47 something. Okay, so they're all desperately working, including this your buddy at IIT Delhi, right? Naveen Garg and his students are furiously working at this moment to try to close the gap for 1.463. Okay, so this problem has been well studied. In fact, I could have done all my 5 lectures on just the facility location problem, right? Because I could have taught greedy algorithm, which is what I did. I did K-median, but I could have done local search for facility location. Okay, now I just did filtering and rounding. I could have done primal dual for facility location. That will give me a 3 approximation algorithm. I could have done that too. Okay, and what else is left? I mean, that's my 5 lectures. Tomorrow I'll do metric relaxations. But basically facility location is one of these, it's one of these problems for which you throw any tool at it, it works. Okay, so you can, it's such a nice, it's a favorite among us who try to teach approximation algorithms because it's very easy to, it just shows up, right? Yeah. Okay, so I have 45 minutes. Let me try to show you primal dual for Steiner tree. Okay, there's one extra idea in Steiner tree which is interesting, so I want to show you that. Actually, I'm going to be even more ambitious. I'll show you Steiner forest. Yeah. Yeah. Right. What's the final approximation?
Is there any generalized way through which we could do it? Because when we are solving a given problem, we don't want to do it randomly and taking value like 2 or...
Yeah, so first you will prove some constant. Then you will replace the 2 with alpha. Right? You will do all the calculation. And you will do both the guarantee for the assignment cost and for the facility opening cost in a function of alpha. You will get 2 different terms of alpha. You will set them to be equal and solve for alpha. That's exactly what you'll do. Yeah. So it's not very complicated. Yeah. Okay. Good. So now we are going to do primal dual. So again, I'm switching back to the other type. For generalized Steiner forest. Okay, so you remember what this problem is? You're given a metric or a graph, let's say, just given a graph, and you're given SI-TI pairs, which I will usually denote by, 2 triangles, 2 stars, like 2 X's. Okay? And I want you to find a minimum cost subgraph such that in each connected, each SI is connected to its TI in the subgraph. Okay? So first of all, if I have a bunch of these pairs, notice that you will never form a cycle because you only want connectivity. So the third edge in the cycle, last edge in the cycle is useless. So what you will get will be a collection of trees. But you don't necessarily need to have one tree because it could look like this. Right? You just want minimum cost. In each tree, you will be matching up these pairs. Okay, any other observations we can make? What can we say about the leaves of these trees? They will be terminal nodes. So we'll call these nodes as terminals. R. Okay? So one of these leaves better be a terminal because otherwise, like why is that guy there? I mean, you can just delete that edge. Okay? In fact, that is going to be the most important observation about this problem. I'll tell you right away. Okay? The leaves of a minimal solution are terminals. Why? Because they require to be connected to somebody else. Okay? In fact, the leaves together, the leaves are best examples of something called an active set. You remember this active set? We did this already. Okay, an active set is a subset of nodes such that, okay, S intersect SI Ti is exactly 1 for some I. What does that mean? It's a set which contains an Si or a Ti, but not its mate. But that means that set better be connected. Somebody has to come out of that set and go to the other side, because otherwise this Si and Ti will be disconnected from each other. Okay? So a singleton Si is an active set because it hasn't got a Ti. Okay? So what I've just told you is that in this minimal solution, all the leaves are active sets by themselves. Okay, all right. Let's write the linear program. Minimize the set of edges you choose. Okay? Now, there's only one type of constraint I'm going to write. Okay? This may not be the way you write the LP for Steiner Forest the first time you try it. Okay, what might you do? You all have seen linear programs for flow, right? Or spanning tree, right? So you're probably going to write some program that says, you know, send 1 unit of flow from Si to Ti and install enough capacities, blah, blah, blah. All of that is fine, but it turns out the most elegant way to write an LP formulation says, look at any active set S and look at the set of edges leaving the boundary of S, right? With exactly one endpoint in S. If the set is active, it has an unmatched pair, so you better choose at least one edge from the boundary, right? Otherwise, it's a connected component by itself, right? You've separated, right? So you just write sum E belongs to delta S of XC at least 1 for all active sets S. Okay? And I claim if I just write the integrality constraints with this, this is a formulation of generalized Steiner Forest. That's all. Well, I'm saying that's all, but the number of active sets is exponential. Okay? Number of possible subsets is exponential. Okay? But still, let's check that if I gave you a 0-1 solution for this problem, I've actually given you a Steiner Forest. How do you prove that? This is how it goes. Here is a 0-1 solution. Suppose for a contradiction, it is not a feasible solution for Steiner Forest. What does it mean it's not feasible? There is a, not a better, I just want feasibility. There is a pair which is not connected. Okay, so suppose I take the set of all the guys for which XC is 1, okay, and I get some set. And in that set of edges, some pair is not connected. So I look at the connected component containing the SI of that pair, where X is 1. That set does not contain Ti, by our assumption, right? And it's a full connected component of XC. So that means if I take the edges coming out of it, none of them is chosen in my solution, and it is an active set. Therefore, it violates this constraint. Right? Suppose for a contradiction, some pair Si Ti is not connected in the X equals 1 solution, right? Then there is a connected component containing Si but not Ti. Look at the cut around it, it's got 0 value, but that set is an active set, violating this constraint for that active set. Therefore, if I cover all the active cuts by installing an edge across all the active cuts, I actually get a feasible forest. Okay? So, that's our first step. We got our primer. Okay? Now, relaxation is that. Okay? I want to do a primal dual algorithm, remember. So I need to write the dual. What's the dual? What are the dual variables? One for each active set. Okay, so sum over active sets, I have a dual variable. What does it multiply? 1, so it's just sum. Okay, and what is the constraint corresponding to a variable xe? Okay, all right. So, I have multipliers ys for all of these guys. When will that edge occur in a constraint? Well, if the edge crosses the active set. So, the constraints for which this edge will appear, right, are exactly the constraints corresponding to active sets containing it. Okay, so let me just write that. I sum over all the active sets that contain this edge. Right? I have to sum over their y value, and that has to pack, and it has to pack at most CE. That's it. Again, this is true for all E. Okay? It's not very different from vertex cover, okay? In vertex cover, what were we doing? For every edge, we wanted to cover it by picking an endpoint. What are we doing here? For every active cut, we want to cover it by picking an edge. That's all. It's a covering problem. What's the dual of vertex cover? You have to come up with y values on the edges so that they don't fill the suitcase at a node. Here, I have to come up with y values on cuts so that they don't overfill the suitcase of a edge. So the dual of a covering problem is a packing problem. Okay? So the dual is simply just a maximum packing of active cuts. That's all. Okay? All right. So now I'm going to start calling these y values or packing of active cuts as motes. Mote. Okay, why am I calling it a mote? As you'll see here. What is an example? Let's suppose all my examples are going to be in the plane. Okay? What is an active set in a plane? So like I said, this guy is an active set. It separates SI from DI. Okay? Is this guy an active set? Yeah. Okay? Now, what does it mean to say that I give this active set a y value of 1? That means in the Euclidean plane, right, I basically build a cut around this set of width equal to 1, some delta, okay, that separates all these guys from their complement. Okay? And if I find this width of this region in the plane of width at least delta, then I can say y of this set consisting of these three guys, right, is delta. Okay? What is the graph I'm thinking of? The graph essentially is the plane. In other words, for every pair of nodes that I've drawn, the distance between them is the Euclidean distance, right? The distance in the plane. Okay? And I'm trying to pack these cuts on the edges, all these edges in the graph. Right? The reason I'm going to call it a moat is because when my graph is Euclidean, right, it looks like a moat around a castle. Right? And why this is a castle because, it has got the prince, but it hasn't got the princess. Or, it's got the princess, but it hasn't got the knight. Right? So the moat is separating them. Right? This guy has to get across it. Okay? So this LP says every moat should be crossed by a knight to get to the princess. That's what the LP says. And the dual says the lower bound on the amount that these knights have to travel is a maximum packing of disjoint moats. So for example, in this picture, right, if I find a 1 kilometer moat around this guy, another 1 kilometer moat around this guy, and they don't touch. Okay? And I find another 1 kilometer moat here, 1 kilometer moat here, and say another 2 kilometer moat between them. Then I would have convinced you that these knights together have to travel 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 2. Because all of them are disjoint from each other, and any knight who's trying to go from Si to Ti, for each I in this component, has to cross each of these modes, and they're all different from each other, so it has to cross all of them. That's why it has to cross the sum of them. Okay? So that's the way you should think of this dual. Right? It's a way of trying to build these modes in a way such that you are maximizing the width of these modes. Okay? All right, so 30 minutes. So here's my algorithm. Remember how we did the algorithm for vertex cover? We picked an edge and we increased its value, the dual value. So now I don't have edges, I have sets. I have an exponential number of sets. Okay? And I have to pick some set and start increasing its value. Okay? Here is the place where one new idea becomes helpful. Okay? In this picture, instead of picking just one set like this set or this set, it turns out to be useful to pick all the possible reasonable sets. What do I mean by that? So let me draw a refined picture. Okay, let me draw it here. Distance is 2. Let's say this distance is 3. Okay, say this distance, let's say, is 6. Let's say, all right, this distance here, let's say, is also 6. Let me make this 16. Okay, so here's a very simple example. Okay, I mean, it's not exactly in the plane, but I'm just sort of embedding it here. Okay, so how many active cuts are here? Well, there's lots of active cuts here. Right? So instead of just picking 1 or 2, I'm going to pick all the active cuts that make sense here. So what do I mean when I say active cuts that make sense? I'm going to pick all the minimal ones. In this case, minimal means this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy. 6 cuts. Okay, so there's 2 circles, 2 stars, 2 squares. These are the SITIs. Okay, so why am I doing that? It turns out in this class of primal dual algorithms for graph problems, racing all of these active cuts is just like doing shortest paths. Okay, so what does that mean? I'm saying, look, I'm going to explore a ball of radius r around this node. Okay? Now, it turns out to be useful if you try to explore a ball of radius r from everybody at the same time. Why? Because if everybody is growing at the same time, if 2 of those balls meet, you have discovered, right, which pair are close to each other. Okay? And this is actually a good thing, just like in our vertex cover algorithm. Because when I started raising the dual variable, somebody got tight, it told me what I should do. So in the same way, if I was just growing one guy, let's say here, I just grow without worrying about the others, the only desirable event will be that this guy will hit the closest terminal. Okay? But it's not giving me any information about the graph, right? I start at some random guy, I just find the closest terminal. I don't need to do primal dual to discover this. But now, if I grow from everybody, and I start growing, what will be the first pair of modes that will become tight? Be these guys, right? At time 1, balls of radius 1 will touch on this length 2 edge. Now, what do we do when a constraint becomes tight in the dual? We use complementary slackness, and we make the corresponding primal variable 1. So that means, in this case, at time 1, we will build this connection. Okay? Actually, it happens to be true that this connection satisfied that pair, S1 and T1. Okay? Notice that at this time 1, this guy has also grown for distance 1, this guy has grown for distance 1, that guy has grown for distance 1, this guy has grown for distance 1. But they haven't met each other because the distances are still far. Okay? How many modes have we grown? 6. What's the LP value we have collected? 6 times 1. 6 again. Okay? How much have we paid out so far? 2. We only built 2 edges of length 2. Okay, how do we continue our algorithm? Merge them? Okay, well, they are already merged. Should we continue to grow around this guy? Yes? It's no longer active. Oh man, we are in trouble. Because it's not active, I can't grow this guy, because if I grow that guy, the Y value of that set, right, does not count. It only counts for active sets. So in some sense, this part that we discovered in a solution is dead. It's not active. But you know, these guys are not dead yet. So they'll continue growing. What will happen next? Yeah, let's make this 4. Okay, so one more time unit. Actually 3 is enough, right? Yeah, I knew I had it for a reason. Yeah. So at time 1, this guy is eaten up, this guy is eaten up. This is length 3. So in one more unit, this guy will grow. This guy will also grow. Okay. Okay, and this guy will also grow for another time unit. Right? But the next event in this algorithm will be this connection being tight. Okay? Sorry? This connection and this connection, that's right, yeah, at the same time. So what do? 2 more edges have become tight. Okay, so we add them. Right, now this component is dead. Right, because this pair has found their mate. This component is not yet dead. It will grow for another one more time unit. And at time 3, this will also die. Right? And now there are no more active components. Okay? Let's say that the length of this edge is also 6. I'm sorry, 1, 2, 4. Okay, so remember, this collision here happened at time 2. So at time 2, these 2 cuts will also meet here. Let's just say, okay. So if that happens, you know, this also became tight. So we should also build this edge. Right, I can do that. Now, there is a problem with these kind of things becoming tight. I mean, the reason I put that example is just to, you know, this can happen, right? I'm sort of growing 2 different modes, right? And they suddenly hit each other somewhere, like here. But at exactly the same time, they also hit somewhere else, right? Now, if I make both these paths tight, what have I built here? Cycle. It's totally useless, right? So one way to get rid of this cycle is to say, choose what you like as happening first. Let's say you count this collision as happening first, then you count this collision, then you count this collision. For each collision, you process the path that got tight, you add it. So after the first collision, if I add this, the component will be this and this merged. It's still active. This is also active, and they merged at time 0 because no more to grow. So then this whole thing merged. When all of these three merged, this is actually not even a collision because they're all part of the same group. Right? This started out being three different modes. One was dead, two were active. I merged the top mode with the dead mode. Then I merged this mode with that second active mode. At that point, this doesn't even show up as an edge between modes. It's actually already within one mode. Okay? So that's one reason why this will never be chosen by our algorithm. We'll always pick a tree, set of trees. Why will this algorithm give me a feasible solution? Yeah? Yeah, as long as there's an active component, it will keep growing. And why will this active component not grow? It bumps into somebody and it is tight. So it will merge with that component, active or not. If when it merges, it becomes dead, that means everybody's satisfied. If not, it is still active, it continues to grow. So it's exactly like vertex cover, right? As long as there are an active components, my algorithm continues to grow. But the important point is, everybody who's active grows at the same rate. They're like balloons which are all expanding at the same rate, right? And when the algorithm stops, the set of tight edges you have chosen, right, form a feasible solution because they have connected all these nodes within these components. Yeah.
Can you put this pruning at the very end?
This pruning? Actually, I would not even have added it to prune it. That's what I'm trying to say. Because the way I run my algorithm and process the merges is in pairs. So I would not, in my algorithm, say, here are three components that all met at the same time. Let me throw all the edges that got tight. I would never do that. I would always take two at a time that merged, find the path between them that merged, throw that in, call the whole thing a new component. Then I'll have this component. It merged again, the second part with this guy. Then I pull this path in. At that point, I only have one component. There's nothing to merge. Right? I'm just saying that the process of merging is tree-shaped, right? I take two guys, merge them, and I take a third guy, merge them. This process is inherently just a tree. I never build cycles in it. Okay. Good. So now I just have to finish the proof. I have 20 minutes. It's great. Okay. What do I have to prove? I have to prove that this method, right, builds modes and builds a set of trees such that the cost of the tree that I pay for is at most 2 times the dual that I collect. So it's exactly like that vertex cover proof I'm going to do. Let's make sure how much dual that this algorithm collect until it ends. 2, 1 plus 1, 2 plus 2, okay, 3 plus 3. Okay, so the total mode I have collected is 1 plus 1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 3 plus 3. Is that clear? The sum of y values that I have collected here, 1 for this mode, 1 for this mode, 1 plus 1, so 2 for that mode, 1 plus 1 grew for time 2, right, at mode, and this mode grew for time 3. So it's that much. How much did I pay? I paid 2 plus 3 plus 3 plus 6. Right? I paid 2 plus 3 plus 3 plus 6. Okay, so this is 13. Okay, and this is 12. Okay, so in this particular case, I have a 13 by 12 approximation algorithm. Right? Why is it 14? Oh, 2 plus 3 plus 3, right. 14 by 12 approximation algorithm. So I've got a 7/6 approximation algorithm in this particular instance. Okay, and my goal is to prove that in general it is at most 2. Okay, that's what I'm trying to prove. Okay, so let's write down some properties of this dual growing algorithm, which I will use in my proof. Okay, I only need 2 properties for this dual growing algorithm, and it comes out of complementary slackness. Okay, so let me write down the properties of this algorithm. So I realize I haven't written this out formally, but writing it out takes a bit of work, right? Because there is like a global time counter which starts at 0. And then everybody starts growing a ball of radius r or radius t, where t is the current time. Right? All the active terminals, singletons, start growing this ball of radius t until a pair of them merge. Like here. When that happens, a pair of them touch, okay? These balls are butting each other. You find the path that became tight, add it to the solution, merge the 2 sets, continue. Right? This way you add pairs. You only continue growing the balls that are active. Okay? There is one step I did not tell you about, which is a bit complicated. Okay? Actually, let me tell you about it now. Then I can write it as my second property. Okay? So here is the step I didn't tell you about. Okay? So let me think of an example where this actually happens. Okay, good. Okay, so here, actually a simple example. Okay, let's start growing modes. At time 1, these balls will merge. Right? Let's even make it 4. Okay? They merge, and so this becomes tight, right? Is this an active component? Yes, right? So now this will also grow. This will continue to grow. This will continue to grow. Right? And at time 2, what will happen? All of them will merge. Right? First, a pair of them will merge. Let's say the top pair merges. And then this pair will merge. Okay? So that's my set of edges that I've bought is everything on the path. Think of what we did in vertex cover with loops. Right? We first raised the y value of an edge until it hit the loot. And then we put that edge in the uncovered set. Then later on, accidentally, some node came and covered this looted edge. Then we said, I don't have to pay for the loot, I'll take it out. We cleaned up, right? So we can clean up here too, right? Because in the first step of the algorithm, I connected this pair. Later, I connected that pair, and then I realized that the first edge I connected is not useful. So after I finish my algorithm, I can check every merge that happened in the past, look at the path I added, and ask myself, if I delete that path, will the remaining solution remain feasible? If it does, then I'll just delete it. That's the cleanup. Okay? So that's the full description of the algorithm. Grow active sets, merge modes when they meet. Okay? Build up this whole component. In the very end, consider each path in any order you like, it turns out. Okay? If the path that you added can be deleted without changing the feasibility of the remaining solution, just delete it. Actually, it will be a path, right, in general. I mean, I'm sweeping a lot of things under the rug. This could actually be a metric with a lot of other non-terminal nodes here. I'm only exposing the distance between them. So it's actually going to be a path. So let's think of it as a path. Okay, now the 2 properties I get from the algorithm. One is, for all edges in my solution, F is my forest I built in the very end, okay? C of E, I claim, equals the sum over active S containing this edge of ys. This is complementary slackness. I said, look, if you ever bought an edge, like this edge, the reason you bought it is because it became tight. What does it mean to become tight? This constraint was tight for it. That's exactly complementary slackness. If you built an edge, it was because you were guided by complementary slackness. So this constraint is true for this edge, this edge, this edge, and that edge that you bought. And in this example, it's true for this edge which you cleaned up too later, but it's still true, right? Look at the modes loading it. 1 plus 1 is 2. That's exactly its distance. Okay? So it's just a property of the algorithm. There's nothing fancy here. The second one is a bit more fancy. Okay? Second one says, look at some point of time t in your algorithm. Somewhere while you're running this algorithm. Okay? What does the world look like at that point? Well, you have grown some modes. Right? Like here. At time t equals 1 in the algorithm, there were 5 modes. This one merged and it was dead. Right? This one was alone, this one was alone, that one was alone, that one was alone. There were 5 modes. So I'm saying generally look at some time t in the algorithm, it looks like this. Some of them are dead and the others are still active. Dead and active. Okay? Now, at that point of time t, you grew for a while, right? You grew the modes until the next collision happened. So look at what you grew. So here's something you grew. This you did not grow, it's dead. This you grow. This is dead. This you grow. Okay? So the amount of growth happening is here. Okay? And we are looking at some portion of time in the execution of this algorithm. Okay, so this is happening between, say, some t and t plus delta. That's what this algorithm is looking at. Okay, this algorithm is growing. Okay, now go forward all the way to the end of the algorithm. Okay, so this is the picture at t to t plus delta. Now go forward all the way to the end of the algorithm. Throw in all the edges f. Clean up all the edges that you don't need. Okay? Now look at what those edges f look like in that picture. Okay, so clearly there's going to be some edges which are tight. There's at least going to be one edge coming out of every active set. Right? Because it's a feasible solution. F is feasible. Right? So each of these active sets will have at least one coming out. Maybe they'll even have more than one in the final solution F. Okay? Okay? So in other words, you can build an auxiliary graph where you contract all the modes at time t. Some of them are labeled dead, others are active, and the set F will be a forest on those contracted components. Right? It won't have any cycles. Why? Because if it had a cycle, I would clean it up. Right? I would not have put any cycles. Here's something even more interesting. This is what I started this whole generalized Steiner forest stuff with. In the forest, there's going to be components like this one. What can I say about the leaves components in that forest? Can it be dead? Can it be dead? Can I have a component like that going to a dead thing and this is the forest? Because if I delete that path, right, it will still be feasible. So I will not, this is just what I started the lecture with. In any minimal solution, all the leaves of the trees are active. So it's true even after cleanup. That's the whole point of doing this cleanup. Okay? Delete paths which don't help you for feasibility. Because of that, I will never have a dead leaf. All the leaves will be active. So this is the main point I want to make. all leaves are active. This is property 2. It comes from cleanup. Property 1 comes from complementary slackness, the way we built our edges. Okay? Now I think I'm ready to finish the proof. Okay? Yeah. 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 That's right. But at what time is it dead? Finally. But this is for a time in the middle of the algorithm, t to t plus delta, for positive delta. Okay? So whenever your algorithm is running for some finite time, right, look at the beginning of that time, I claim if you look at all the components, contract them, and you look at the final cleaned up forest that you retain, all the leaf components will be active. Why? Because of cleanup, feasibility, that's all. Okay, so I think that will help me end my thing. I'm basically there. Okay, so what is the cost? I think I don't need that anymore, maybe. Let me write it down here. Okay. These are properties 1 and 2 I need. Okay, what is the cost of the edges in my solution? Well, I use property 1. Okay, it's exactly equal to the sum over active S just this one. Sum over active S, the mote values that load me. That's the cost. Yeah, it's true for everybody. So now, just like in vertex cover, I'm going to flip the order of summation. Instead of going over E, I'm going to go over active S. But what is going to multiply YS here? Okay, now we have to be careful. So, let's go back to this picture. Okay? Between time t and t plus delta, right? I look at these motes that I have grown. Okay, I have grown 3 motes here of value delta. Right? So each of them has increased by, each of those YSs has increased by delta each. Right? So that's how much YS has increased. But how much have they paid in terms of the cost of the edges that they load, that they contribute to? Number of edges crossing them. Right? So in fact, this mote pays 2 times delta for these 2 edges. That mote pays 1 times delta. This mote pays 1 times delta. Okay? So each of these sets S pays exactly the degree in the forest F of S. Right? That's how much it pays. Okay? And think of doing this between the time t and t plus delta, then I can use induction. If it holds for any t to t plus delta, I can just integrate over the range of t. Okay? So for a particular t to t plus delta, right, this summation of how much I am paying, which is exactly this part, is exactly equal to, by flipping the order of summation, my degree. Okay? I want to prove this is at most 2 times summation ys S active. What am I trying to prove? I'm trying to prove that the degree, I mean, again, all of these guys are paying delta. So I can take delta out. All of the YSs are delta between time t and t plus delta. Right? So I'm trying to prove, so what I'm spending here is, this is CE, and again, this is from time t to t plus delta. Okay? And what I'm actually paying in the time t to t plus delta, come back here, is delta, that's this guy, times summation S active degree of S and F. That's what I'm trying to pay. How much money do I have to pay with? Well, how much dual have I collected in the time t to t plus delta? Well, every active guy grew for delta. Okay, so I can pay dual in t to t plus delta that I've collected is delta times sum over active S 1. Right? Number of active sets. Every active set, like this 3 here, in time t to t plus delta, grew for distance delta. Right? That's the dual I collected. So the primal I pay is delta times the degree of the active nodes. The dual I pay is the number of active nodes. Okay? So to prove an approximation guarantee of 2, I have to argue that this is less than or equal to 2 times that. That's what I need. Deltas will cancel. All I have to show is at any point t in the algorithm, where I'm growing for t plus delta, the degree of the active nodes in the contracted forest on average is 2. The average degree of the active nodes is 2. Because there's a number of active nodes, this is the sum of their degrees. The average degree of a node in a tree is 2. Property 2 tells me all the leaves are active. That means all the dead nodes have degree at least 2. Average degree of everybody is 2. All the dead guys are at least 2. So when I throw them away, what's the average degree of the remaining guys? At most 2. Well, that's what I have to prove. That's it. That's the end of the proof. Okay? Remember, all you had to remember was all the leaves are active. Because the leaves are active, the dead guys have degree at least 2. Total average is 2. Knock out the guys whose value is 2 or higher. The remaining guys' average is also at most 2. But that's exactly what you have to prove for induction. That's the end of the whole proof. Okay? So the only 2 things you need in this case are complementary slackness, which guided our adding the paths, and cleanup. Cleanup gave us that all leaves are active. Okay? And that's basically together, they show you by induction over the course of the algorithm that you are using at most twice the dual you are collecting in that period to build the primal in that period. Okay? So this algorithm was part of what I was doing when I was writing my PhD. Okay? But our proof was not this proof. We had a very different proof. Okay? Our proof was a proof that did induction not on the time periods, but on the events of the algorithm. What are the events of the algorithm? Hitting, collisions. So our paper was called When Trees Collide, because our induction was on collisions. So every time things collided, we said, let's just build that path, okay, and pay for that path with all the money we have collected. Okay? So in fact, we have a very different proof argument, which turns out to be useful in some other context. Like when you're doing some game theoretic explanation on this tree, it turns out to be better to worry about collisions and not time slabs. Okay? So our argument said, look, this is one moat or company which comes with its own tree built inside and some savings accumulated. There is another moat on the other side which comes with its own tree inside and savings accumulated. They now come and collide. So there's a merger. So they put their savings together, but they save a little bit from that to pay for the connection. And we had a running induction which showed that the amount of savings was always sufficient to finish off this whole proof. Okay? This proof is due to Gomans and Williamson, who thought that our proof was extremely long. So they came up with this extremely clever proof. And they also applied it to some other problems. For example, the price collecting Steiner tree problem. Okay? You have to build a Steiner tree connecting a bunch of terminals, but there is a loot at each terminal. And if the loot is too small, I don't want to go there. Yeah? So I minimize the cost of the tree plus the loot of the unincluded vertices. So for that, the same algorithm right? The way they modified it works beautifully. Okay, so then there's a lot of, since then there's lots of papers now, including the paper on uncapacitated facility location. So once I tell you the way you should be growing your moats is everybody growing at the same time, then there is a natural algorithm that you can write down tonight for uncapacitated facility location, which will give you factor of 3. All the clients will grow at the same rate. They'll fill up some facility. When the facility gets filled up, you'll buy the facility. Okay? You'll do that to a bunch of facilities. In the end, all the clients will be happy. But you won't open every facility. You will clean up. How will you clean up? You will clean up by looking at the facilities in the order in which they were opened. Do our maximal independent set argument. You'll pick only the first few guys who you can pay for separately, and that will be a 3 approximation algorithm. So there are many, many papers now which use this idea of growing greedily at the same rate. Okay, and that's basically what I want to tell you about. Now you know the idea, so you can try it on something else. For example, even vertex cover, all the edges can grow if they like, at the same time. It'll still work out. Okay, so you just have to figure out how to pay for what you keep after cleaning up with respect to what you collect. Okay, so tomorrow we are going to do metric relaxation. Okay, so until now I've been trying to connect things up, right? Cover things, connect up vertices, terminals. Tomorrow I'm going to look at 3 problems where I'm just going to cut people off. Okay, so in the first problem, I will look at S and T, they have to be disconnected. Min ST cut. I'm going to write a simple LP for min ST cut, and I'm going to round it with approximation ratio 1. Then I'm going to look at cutting away K different terminals, S1, S2, S3 until K. Every SI has to be cut away from every other SJ. That's called multi-way cut. I'll take the first LP I wrote, I'll round the same thing, now I'll get approximation 2. Then I'll do this thing. I'll have pairs SI, TI. Each SI has to be cut from its TI. I'll write the same LP, but now I will round it and get an approximation factor log K. Okay? The nice thing is it will be the same LP. And the whole point of the LP tomorrow will be that the LP is trying to, here the LP is trying to connect people, there the LP is trying to create a distance between people. Okay? Trying to say you have to, SI has to be far away from TI. So install enough length in the graph so that I have to travel a distance of at least 1 before I get to TI. So that's why I call it a metric relaxation, because the edges you're building are distances. Okay? Once I can interpret the LP values as distances, the one nice way of cutting is actually to do this, is to grow breadth first search trees, is to grow moats. So tomorrow I'll be growing moats. Today I grew moats to connect people. Tomorrow I'll be growing moats to cut people off. Okay? But that's because the LP value will give me the distance relaxation. Okay? That's for tomorrow. Okay.